Today I'm speaking about designing urban weather, which is part of my research done several years ago, looking at what happens with the weather when it enters into big cities. So we know that cities change the weather. In cities we see more lightnings than in the countryside, more thunderstorms, more high temperatures, weaker winds, and less sunlight. With the streets, parks, building, cars, fumes, smog, cities produce their own weather. And the larger they are, the larger these changes. Especially in the summer, cities are attacked by something known as the urban heat island. That is the fact that cities on the average during the summer, especially summer nights, record higher temperatures than the surrounding countryside. So today I want to speak about the urban heat island, and show how some cities are dealing with this phenomenon with somewhat unexpected ways, a story that may shed some new lights on climate policy in general, and do so creatively. So let's go. So this urban heat island has been known since the early 19th century, when the London chemist Luke Howard first claimed that the temperature of the city is not to be considered as the temperature of the natural climate, because it was raised artificially by the city, just like a temperature in a beehive was raised by bees. This was true, and since Howard's time, early 19th century, this fact became widely known. For example, in 1892, the Mancunian meteorologist Arthur Schuster claimed that the observations taken in the big cities in a large town show existence of something that he called the town weather as opposed to the country weather. Okay, and so this fact was well established to the point that in 1937, this is prior to World War II, a well-known German urban climatologist could actually show how the city of Munich creates its own thunderstorm by the convective rise of air during the summer days. In the 20th century, Schuster's town weather became a huge problem for public health, for environment and the economy. As smog and heat descended above big cities, planners and climatologists started to look for solutions. And one of these solutions had to do with the city's design. So this idea of climatologically well-designed cities is one of the first more comprehensive approaches to creating a healthy city, based on minimizing the negative impact of the city growth, and also the maximizing of something that can be seen as the city's hidden environmental reserves. Sometimes, as these images of the Bauhaus's architect Hilbersheimer's proposal for redesigning the city of Chicago, it was a matter of planning using geometry that was based on prevailing winds. And these solutions were known well before today's so-called smart cities or green cities or low emission cities or clean and connected cities, and long before green walls and green roofs and the Million Trees Initiative. So this is something that has a long history and has actually been implemented in certain places. Let's see where and how. So how does it actually work? So to answer that, I'm going to speak more specifically about something that is not widely known within the climate policy, and this is wind paths, the issue of wind paths or wind corridors. So let's talk about the city of Stuttgart. It's a large German town known for its pollution and its unfortunate topography, being at the bottom of a basin that chokes in smoke from heavy industry. So the city suffered a terrible case of air pollution in the 20th century, but it was observed that as the city grew smokier and warmer in the basin, the air, the top of the hills, continued to be relatively pure and cold. And as is the case with everything that's cold, it tends to go down. So Stuttgart planners soon realized that this cool air was actually seeping into the city and purifying it. So they thought, if the city could be built to allow this natural process to continue to happen, then nature itself could provide a solution to the city's pollution. And one of the first plan developments in the city of Stuttgart was designed precisely to allow for this by positioning of new housing developments, as was the case in this little village of Postdorf that made specifically for the Stuttgart's post workers, in which you can see the distance between the houses and the existence of the lanes that allow the cool air from the top of the surrounding hills to go into the city. So this is not really a rocket science. And this is how the idea of wind paths was born, namely to create a space that allows the cooler air and fresh air to spread through the city by a cleverly designed areas and layout. So the idea generally kind of grew into the city's policy building codes. Today in German national guidelines, there is a mention of the so-called ventilation lanes and art directing tracks created by proper alignment of cities and limited building heights. And to help planners determine these factors, climatologists produced the so-called climate atlases, clima atlases, showing the location of these local wind paths in this picture marked in blue. So the lesson from Stuttgart was, yes, cities make their own weathers, but they can also unmake them. Urban heat doesn't have to be a matter of fate, because it can have a solution. So instead of waiting for that proverbial late night breeze during the summer long nights, the city itself can work for you by means of its own breeze-friendly design. So how do you design a breeze-friendly city? To see that, let's move to Tokyo. It's the largest city in the world, where, and in particular in Japan, this German ventilation idea, the ventilation lanes are known as kaze-no-michi, which translates roughly to a wind path, a windway. So the idea borrows from Stuttgart, but is applied in a different weather situation. In Tokyo, for example, these wind paths are created by the summer breeze. So as the city warms during the day, the air above the city expands and creates an atmospheric gradient that pulls the cool water from the Tokyo Bay into the city and gradually cools it. It seems like the city knows how to cool itself, except it doesn't, because the city of Tokyo grows, and in that growth, it progressively weakens the penetration of the sea breeze into the city that you see in the show in this picture. The city sometimes can get so hot that the local high-rise areas create their own thunderstorms, sometimes known as spot downpours, shown here in the research of Mikami-san. On most days, however, barricaded by these high-rise districts, Tokyo gasps for cool air, and in doing so, consumes extra electricity for air conditioning and loses money on a labor force afflicted by the heat-induced sleeplessness. In early 2000s, to rectify these issues, Tokyo metropolitan government created a policy framework on creation of wind paths linking the inner city with the cooler waters of the Tokyo Bay. In a project that we did at the time, we visited the team who explained these ideas to us. We visited their scale projects and got the idea of how they think of creating these wind paths in real cities. So Dr. Tatsuo Akashi, one of the scientists involved in the study, argued that you can intentionally induce the cool sea breeze into the heated urban area. You could then create the urban planning that mitigates the urban heat island in a purely natural way. So Akashi looked at two projects on sea breeze circulation. One of these was, first of all, Tokyo train station. What you see in these two pictures is the physical model that they created in their wind tunnel. The upper picture shows a small area surrounded by the orange dots, which is the Daimaru department store, a kind of iconic area of the area, which was supposed to go. And the sea breeze was coming from the top of the image, the long avenue. This Daimaru department store was blocking the sea breeze, and the idea was to, first of all, remove the department store and to build two larger high-rise buildings on the side of this, which would hopefully create sea breeze entering into the area at the bottom of the picture known as Marunouchi area. And to give you a better sense of where we are and how the sea breeze enters into the city, I've taken this kind of a different vantage point. I'm hovering above the Tokyo Bay, and then I'm going to fly directly into Tokyo Station, the Marunouchi area. So you see, you get the point that the wind is blowing into the city, reaching this area, and then being stopped by the Daimaru store, which is now being removed. And what we see here is the result of that regeneration project. So this thing was effectively simulated by the so-called computational fluid dynamics modeling by the Ahashi team, in which you can see the previous situation showing with the red dot with the Daimaru store. But when you remove the Daimaru store and build two buildings, you see the differences in the wind direction and also on wind speeds. So now we have removed Daimaru and we see in reds higher speeds, higher wind speeds, and spreading deeper into the Marunouchi area, which is on the left-hand side of this image. Okay? You can see that that simulation basically allowed people to understand that changing the morphology of the city can influence the entrance of the cooler air into it, and resulted some really interesting developments for the Mitsubishi Real Estate, which is the company that owns large part of this central Tokyo area. So they realized that because their buildings are now creating this turbulence, they can environmentally and socially improve their sort of a business image. So local employees could now engage in more outdoor activities, but reputationally and financially, their buildings now fetched high rents and attracted the environmentally aware clients. And Mitsubishi then embraced this new board, kaze-no-michi, this new wind path, and nurtured it further through water-retentive pavements, increased grass coverage, and sprinkler systems to continue to create this kind of a cool area. Effectively, Marunouchi, this whole area, became a really cool place to work. The second case study Akashi shows is the famous Shiodome area of Tokyo, here seen in the historical Google image from 1997, showing a kind of a dense wall of building. It's called the Shiodome wall, dense wall of building, which, according to several studies, prevented the sea breeze from entering into the city by simply standing there. Okay, some of these buildings, in fact, increased wind speed due to turbulence, but mostly that stopped the air entering, especially along this kind of a gray mosaic area in the middle of the picture, which are low-lying shops. So the regeneration project, Kansi Avenue, was developed to increase the ventilation of the central area by effectively removing the small shops and creating a large avenue that would allow filtration of the air coming through the Shiodome wall. And this was done in the early 2000s, with the results being proven to increase the ventilation and lower urban heat by instrumental measurements. So the current situation is as following. It's the same area, but without the low-lying shops, and a 40-meter wide avenue that allows the filtration of this air. So what is the promise of these practices, really? First, keep in mind that these wind corridors are not the natural winds that would have naturally occurred in these places were it not for the buildings. They are either made or sometimes strengthened by physical structures and planning. In this sense, they are genuinely designed. Secondly, recent research on wind paths in Chinese cities shows huge promise because these cities are currently in a phase of rapid development, so which are ideally suited for implementation of climatological planning. And finally, these wind corridors have a unique position in climate management policies in places where they can be introduced. They offer the benefits of both adaptation and mitigation to climate risks at the same time. They reduce local effects of urban heating, improve public health, and save energy costs from air conditioning. Plus, they're fun to have.